Do you know what just happened? General Michael Langley, an African-American four-star general, stood before the United States Senate, pointed his finger, and accused President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso of being a threat to his own people. His voice echoed through the cold metallic microphones of Western power. He's hoarding gold. He's strengthening a military regime. He's the next Gaddafi. If you believe Burkina Faso has the right to protect its own resources, follow this channel. This is the story they don't want you to hear. But here's what they didn't expect. In Africa, when someone points a finger at your ancestors, that finger gets burned by truth. Because across the ocean, it wasn't a politician who stood up. It was a soldier, not with guns, not with armies, but with words sharp as a blade that's never dulled in 1,000 years. And when he spoke, an entire continent went silent. Farmers, young mothers, children who hadn't yet learned to read. They paused, looked into tiny screens, and for the first time in their lives heard a leader speak the real name of their true enemy. This was no longer just about Burkina Faso. This was a slap across the face of an entire system that hides behind the word human rights, while killing with a smile. The room was silent when General Michael Langley adjusted the microphone. Cameras rolled. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing was underway, and the agenda seemed routine until it wasn't. Langley looked calm, controlled. Then, with the weight of his stars glinting under the lights, he delivered a blow that echoed far beyond Washington, D.C. Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso is consolidating power through illicit gold reserves. He's using national wealth to fortify a military regime. This kind of behavior destabilizes the region. It threatens the people he claims to protect. Just like that, a sovereign African leader had been reduced to a cautionary tale, a strong man, a new Gaddafi. The words landed without resistance. No one questioned the claim. No one asked for proof. Langley didn't need to raise his voice. In that chamber, silence meant agreement. The only sound was the scribble of pens and the quiet hum of live broadcasts reaching millions. Within hours, headlines screamed across Western media. Burkina Faso's gold-fueled tyrant, the Washington Sentinel, is this Africa's next Gaddafi, the global observer. U.S. General raises alarm on African military regime. BBC World. The narrative was clear. Another African threat had emerged, and once again the story would be written without African voices. But something was different this time. On the streets of Bamako, tweets began to circulate. In Nairobi, TikToks dissected Langley's statement with fury. In Burkina Faso itself, young people flooded the comment sections of international outlets with one defiant message. He's not stealing gold. He's keeping it from being stolen. Across the continent, social media caught fire, not with fear, but with pride. People didn't see a tyrant. They saw a man who had dared to close the door on exploitation, a man who didn't sell his country's wealth for favor, but locked it away from hungry hands abroad. In a powerful thread that went viral across African Twitter, a Ghanaian journalist wrote, "The West calls Traore corrupt for guarding his nation's gold." But ask yourself, if the gold were flowing to Paris or New York, would they call him a hero? While the Western world applauded Langley's warning, Africa heard something else entirely. They heard an old song sung in a new voice. Stand up for your people, and they will come for you. What the Senate saw as a threat, a new generation saw as a line in the sand. And from that moment on, they were no longer just watching. They were listening, waiting, because they knew Traore would respond. And when he did, the world wouldn't be ready, while the Western world awaited a press release, a UN briefing, or perhaps a televised apology. President Ibrahim Traore chose a different stage entirely. Not Geneva, not the Senate, not a glossy podium in front of marble flags. He stood in the heart of Ouagadougou, his capital, his people's capital. There was no red carpet, no crystal chandeliers, just the dusty wind of the Sahel, the hum of 1,000 voices gathered in silence, and a national flag swaying gently behind him. He wore no suit, no tie, just his army fatigues, wrinkled, sun-faded, worn, not for style, but for survival. The uniform of a soldier, not a politician. When the cameras cut in, it wasn't just a local broadcast. It was live across Burkina Faso, across Mali, Niger, Ghana, live streamed by African youth across TikTok, YouTube, and every platform where truth still breathes. Traore didn't begin with thanks. He didn't smile. He didn't perform. He looked straight into the lens and said in a tone so steady it cracked the silence, "Either we fight, or we remain slaves forever." There was no applause. Not yet, just air, still charged, trembling. It wasn't the kind of line meant for headlines. It was meant for the bone, for something older than policy, for memory, because every African village has known the weight of that choice. Fight or kneel, speak or be spoken for, own or be owned across the continent. Something shifted. In a market stall in Dakar, a vendor froze mid-sale on a farm in Tanzania. An old radio crackled back to life. In the refugee camps of northern Burkina, children huddled near generators, not blinking once, because Traore wasn't just talking. He was translating something millions had felt, but never heard aloud. He didn't shout, he didn't gesture, but the calm in his voice carried the heat of a wildfire. He spoke of sovereignty, not as a slogan, but as survival, of gold, not as wealth, but as memory, of silence, not as peace, but as danger. Those who want to support you, let them support you, he said. Those who want to discourage you with their writings, close your ears and keep moving forward. It wasn't a speech, it was a mirror, and in it, Africa saw itself not as poor, broken or chaotic, but as stolen and unbowed. No international translator was needed. Every mother, every miner, every child with dust in their shoes understood. This man was not speaking for the people, he was speaking as one of them. And from the heart of Burkina Faso, his voice was no longer just a response, it was a call. Traore didn't pause to catch his breath. He didn't need to, because what came next wasn't defense, it was revelation. He turned slightly toward the camera, still calm, still grounded, but there was a sharpness now in his tone, a shift from the soil to the sword. They say we violate human rights, he said slowly, but who bombed Libya into chaos, who turned a prosperous nation into a graveyard of migrants, who armed rebels and called it liberation. You could feel it not just in Ouagadougou, but across every place that still bore the scars of that war, not just Libya, but the entire Sahel. They accuse us of abuses, but remain silent about the millions dead in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Congo. They pretend to care for human lives, but only when the cameras are on. His words were no longer just answers, they were accusations of his own. These organizations that come here with fancy names, calling themselves NGOs. He continued, let's be honest, they are not non-governmental. They are state-funded government tools disguised in white coats. They bring reports, not aid, cameras, not help. And when they leave, they write our stories for us without asking who we are. There was no applause, only stillness, the kind that follows a slap no one was expecting. Traore leaned forward slightly, as if speaking directly to someone watching from a private office in New York or Geneva. If protecting our gold is a crime, he said, then letting it fall into foreign hands would be treason. I was not elected to be liked by newspapers. I was chosen to defend a land soaked with the sweat of our ancestors, and I will not apologize for refusing to be robbed politely. You could hear the fire now, not loud, but searing. He didn't say, Western powers. He didn't need to. Everyone knew who he meant. And then he uttered names that had long haunted Africa's collective memory. They say I am a danger, but tell me, was Lumumba a danger? Was Sankara a criminal? Was Gaddafi a terrorist? No. They were men who stood straight, when the world demanded they kneel. And for that, they were eliminated. He let the silence breathe for a moment. You kill those who don't bow, then call them tyrants in your textbooks. You loot our minerals, then call us poor. You destabilize our regions, then call us violent. You build palaces on our diamonds, then call us corrupt. This wasn't just a speech anymore. It was an exorcism of lies, of narratives, of every mask the West had worn in Africa for decades. Let them say what they want, he said. Our people know the truth. We are not perfect, but we are not blind, and we are no longer silent. If you believe, Traore spoke for all of us. Follow the channel and stand with the truth. The camera zoomed in for a moment. Behind Traore, the red, green and gold flag of Burkina Faso fluttered faintly. But it wasn't fabric anymore. It looked like a flame. Traore didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, because when he told this story, the silence carried it farther than any shout ever could. Her name is Aisha. He paused. 24 years old, a school teacher in Kaya. She didn't ask for a gun. She asked for textbooks. She didn't dream of war. She dreamed of classrooms. Aisha wasn't trained to fight. But when the jihadists came tearing through villages, burning schools, stealing sons and daughters, she didn't flee. She stayed. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because some people are built not to run. She joined the VDP, not because someone forced her, but because she refused to be forced out of her land. She became a volunteer, a protector, a guardian. Then came the night of the ambush, a mission gone wrong. Gunfire in the woods. 2 men down. One of them, her comrade, barely 19, while others ran for cover. Aisha lifted him onto her back, and she walked 7 kilometers through the dark, through the fear, through the silence. He looked straight into the lens, not to win a medal, not for the headlines. She walked because no son of this soil should be left behind like a stray bullet. And then his voice shifted from grief to iron. The West saw her photo, bloody, barefoot, broken, and called her a militia. They wrote their articles, published their reports, called her illegal. But let me say this, he leaned forward, voice now a blade. They can write their lies, but they will never understand the heart of a woman who carries her brother's body through a forest. That's not a war crime. That's a war poem. She's not a human rights violator. She's the very definition of human dignity. A pause. You speak of law, but there is a higher law to protect the living and to honor the dead. Across Burkina Faso, screens flickered. Fathers held back tears. Mothers clenched their fists. And in Kaya, in the school Aisha once taught, in a boy whispered, "That's my teacher." And Traore no longer, just a president on screen, became the voice of all who had ever been misnamed, misunderstood, mislabeled. "She is not a rebel," he said. "She is our shield. We are not waiting for a seat at their table. We're building our own." His voice no longer needed to rise, because sometimes truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be clear. For too long, Traore began. They've expected us to wait. Wait for loans that never come. Wait for approvals we never asked for. Wait for partnerships where we give everything and receive nothing. But something in his tone shifted. It was no longer the fire of outrage. It was the calm certainty of a man who had nothing left to ask. "Let me be clear," he said. "We are not waiting anymore. We are not asking to be invited to their summits. We are not begging to be featured in their headlines. And we are not pleading to be called stable or civil or democratic by people who have never known our soil, our pain, or our pride." The studio was silent. We are not requesting validation. We are reclaiming our voice. Then slowly and without drama, he removed the pen clipped to his uniform pocket, held it up between 2 fingers. "This," he said, "is our weapon now, not because we've forgotten how to fight, but because now we choose to define the war." A murmur swept through the crowd outside the broadcast building. No shouting, just breath, collective held and now released. We do not need aid. We need equity. We do not seek pity. We seek parity. We are not chaos. We are consequence. Consequence of treaties signed in rooms we were not in. Consequence of borders drawn with rulers, not roots. Consequence of wealth extracted and truth buried. He paused. But today we dig up that truth, with our voices, with our votes, with our vision, because if guarding our gold is a crime, then handing it over is treason. And now his tone softened, not in weakness, but in reverence. To the elders who kept the fire lit when the storms came, to the mothers who fed the revolution with bare hands, to the youth who dare to dream in a language the West does not understand. I speak not above you, but beside you. A final breath. Then the words that would be quoted on school walls carved into stone, whispered in tents and shouted in parliaments. Do not let the enemy's voice drown out your own. Fight, advance. This is the struggle that ends the chains. The screen dimmed, but the silence didn't stay long. In a dusty plaza in Burkina Faso, an old man gripped the hand of his grandson as they watched the last flicker of the broadcast. He looked down and said, not loudly but with the clarity of a soul long silenced, "You see, child, there is someone who dares to speak for us now. They tried to contain it to one country, to one president, to one broadcast on a state-owned channel. But truth doesn't stop at borders." And Ibrahim Traore's voice didn't echo it, detonated. Within hours, clips of the speech flooded every corner of the internet. YouTube reels, TikTok stitches, Twitter threads, screens lit up in Nairobi, Johannesburg, Dakar, Kigali. The hashtag #Traore speaks. Truth didn't trend. It erupted. By dawn, it was the #1 topic in over 20 countries. In Lagos, a rapper laid down a verse titled "We Are the Consequence," using Traore's words as his chorus. In Accra, a radio host played the full speech every hour, calling it the sermon we didn't know we needed. And in Mombasa, a street artist painted a wall-sized mural, Traore standing firm, arms outstretched, holding a map of Africa close to his chest. Beneath it, our gold, our land, our voice. In schools, something even more unexpected happened. A teacher in Bamako printed the full transcript of the speech, stapled it together like scripture, and handed it to her students. This, she told them, is your civic lesson today, not from a textbook, but from the battlefield of truth. And in living rooms, humble, crowded, quiet parents called their children to watch the replay, to listen, to remember. Because something had shifted. Not just in politics, not just in policy, but in pride. In Zimbabwe, a market vendor said to a journalist, "For once, they didn't call us corrupt. We called them out." In Ethiopia, a university student posted, "I didn't know we were allowed to speak like that. Now I know." And yet, at the center of this storm, the man who caused it all stood still. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't tour world capitals. He didn't even claim victory. He just kept working. When asked by a local reporter how he felt about the global reaction, Traore smiled faintly and replied, "I am just a soldier, but if my words woke someone up, then I did not live in vain." And that's the thing about fire. It doesn't need a parade. It just needs oxygen. Across Africa, it caught from the dust of Burkina Faso to the streets of Abidjan. People were no longer waiting to be told their worth. They had heard it from someone who looked like them, bled like them, and finally spoke like them. Because sometimes that's all it takes. Just one voice, just one moment, just one man who chooses to stand instead of bow. And this time that voice came from Burkina Faso. That man was Ibrahim Traore. If this story moved something in you, if you believe that truth when spoken with courage can shatter centuries of silence, if you see not just a president, but a brother, a fighter, a voice rising from the heart of Africa, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us, what did Traore's speech awaken in you? This isn't about views. This is about visibility. about standing beside the voices that were once buried and now are rising louder than ever. Join the movement. Speak truth. Stay proud. Stay loud.